Thank you so much. Hello everyone. I hope you all are doing great, and I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. Myself, Afaq Ahmad. I'm working as an associate lecturer at the Institute of Business Management and Administrative Sciences of Islamia University Bahawalpur. Negotiation skills are very important and is a crucial aspect, especially at workplace. And negotiation skills importance is present in every sphere of life. But these skills plays an important role in business organizational settings as compared to our daily lives. Thus, it is my pleasure to be a part of this amazing webinar entitled Negotiation Strategy, Psychology, Skills and Tools. In consideration of the importance of the topic, we are very fortunate that our guest speaker is not only the expert on the topic under consideration, but also embedded with the years of practical experience. On behalf of Institute of Business Management and Administrative Sciences of Islamia University Bahawalpur, we are really thankful to Professor Siedel for making time for us in his busy schedule to share his valuable knowledge. Professor George Siedel is an American author and renowned faculty member at the Ross School of Business, University of Michigan. And for our viewers, he is also known for his research on productive law, negotiation, and alternative dispute resolution, and is for work in development of massively open online courses. He completed graduate studies at the University of Michigan and Cambridge University. He worked as an attorney at Professional Corporation and has been admitted for practice before the US Supreme Court in several states. He has served on several boards of directors and associate dean at the Ross School of Business, and where he headed the Executive Education Center. Professor Siedel was a visiting professor at Stanford University and Harvard University, a visiting scholar at Berkeley, and a Parsons Fellow at the University of Sydney. He has been elected a visiting fellow at Cambridge University's Wolfson College and a live fellow of Michigan State Bar Foundation. As a Fulbright scholar, he held a distinguished chair in the humanities and social sciences. The author of numerous books and articles, Professor Siedel receives a faculty recognition and teaching awards from the several universities and national research awards, such as Distinguished Career Achievement Award from Academy of Legal Studies in Business. And the list goes on. So now it is my great honor to invite Professor George Siedel to share his valuable knowledge on the topic. So we are all ears, Professor. Please. Thank you.
Thank you, Afaq, for that introduction. I'm delighted to visit the Institute this morning virtually. Good evening or good afternoon to you all. This morning in Michigan, it is still morning. And as I look out my window from my study here at my home, I see a lot of snow outside. And so I wish I could be with you, not virtually, but actually in Pakistan for some warmer weather. But that's the way it is.
You're always welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much. So as Afaq indicated, we're going to cover several topics this morning in a very concentrated time. But what I'd like to do is to give you a big picture look at some of the key topics in negotiation. So we're going to start with negotiation concepts important in every negotiation that you will be involved in. Then we're going to look at some psychological tools and traps that are important in negotiation. These psychological principles are tools when you use them in negotiation, but they are traps when they are used by the other side. And so you want to avoid being trapped. And then when we're finished looking at the psychology of negotiation, I want to cover several practical tools that I think will be very useful for you going forward. So that's our game plan. And we have saved time at the end for some questions. My content will last approximately an hour, but I do want to save time at the end for questions. So let's start by looking at negotiation strategy and some key concepts that are important in negotiation. Another way to look at this is that these are standards that you should set before you enter a negotiation. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Big Five in Africa. Hunters, when they go to Africa, talk about the Big Five, the most dangerous animals in Africa. If I ask you to name the Big Five, I wonder if you could. Some of them quickly come to mind. You have the elephant, you've got the lion, you've got the rhino. Those are three obvious ones. The last two of the big five are a little bit more difficult to name. One of those is the leopard, and the other one, very dangerous animal, is the buffalo. So those are the big five when you hunt in Africa. But I want to talk about the big five in preparing for negotiation. Whenever you go into a negotiation, you should always have in mind these big five numbers in your mind. The starting point, the very first number you should have in mind is what's called your reservation price, or economists call this your reserve price. Let's start with an example. Let's assume that you and I are negotiating. It's a very simple negotiation. I want to sell you my car, and I'm offering my car to you for $5,000. Now, when you're preparing for this negotiation, this very first number that you should have in mind is your reservation price, which is what's the most that you are willing to pay for the car. So let's assume in this case that your reservation price is $5,500. So right away, you know that you're not going to have to pay the full amount of your reservation price if I'm offering you my car for $5,000. So number one, number your reservation price. Now, when you go into a negotiation with me, do you start with your reservation price in mind? In other words, in this case, I've offered you my car for $5,000. You know it's better than your reservation price. So do you start by saying, okay, I accept your offer of $5,000? Well, of course not, unless you're a very naive negotiator. Instead, you think about two other numbers. One of these numbers is what's called your target price. What do you think is a reasonable price for my car? This is sometimes also called the most likely price. What is the most likely figure that you will end up with in the negotiation? Now, let's assume that in this case, you determine that cars like mine are worth $4,300. And so you think this is a reasonable price for the car. Now, does that mean that when you go into the negotiation with me, you start with the number 4,300? I've offered the car for sale for 5,000. Do you start with 4,300 because you think that's a reasonable price? No. You don't start with your reservation price. You don't start with your target price. Your target price is where you expect reasonably to end up with at the end. Instead, there's a third number, the third out of the big five, and that's called your stretch goal. You want to stretch that target so that you can come back, probably come back to the target at the end. So in this case, let's assume that your stretch goal is 4,000. And so that would be the number when you and I actually start the negotiation. That would be the number that you would start with, thinking that you'll eventually work your way up to the target price. Now, this stretch goal is especially important in negotiation because researchers have concluded that the negotiators who have the largest stretch goals are the ones who are most successful over time. They might be unsuccessful in individual negotiations, but over time, they do better than people with smaller stretch goals. So this number is especially important in your future negotiations. Now, if the stretch goal is important, if it's that important, when I offer my car to you for 5,000, instead of a stretch goal of 4,000, why don't you start with a stretch goal of 1,000? I offer the car to you for 5. You say, okay, I'll offer you 1,000 for the car. Well, I think you can
Professor, are you there?
Negotiation strategy. They often will say to me, well, I want to go into the negotiation and obtain as much information as I can from the other side. Well, that's a very good strategy. You always want to do that. But you also want to go in with standards so that you have some way to measure the information that the other side is giving you. So we have 3 out of the big 5 that are important in negotiation: reservation price, target, stretch goal. The 4th number is the most important part of your preparation for negotiation. And the acronym for this number is BATNA, B-A-T-N-A, BATNA. This is where you should always start when you prepare for any negotiation. You should ask yourself, what is my BATNA? Because BATNA is what gives you power in a negotiation. Now, what does this stand for? BATNA stands for best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And what that means is you always want to look at what is your alternative if this negotiation fails. Now, in this case, let's assume that if the negotiation fails, you can buy another car, much like the one I'm offering to sell you, for $4,500. That is your alternative if the negotiation fails. And as you can see, this is what gives you leverage in a negotiation. This is what gives you power, because if you have a strong alternative, then if you don't get what you want from me, you can walk away. You have that power. And so BATNA is the most important of the numbers that you're going to think about when you prepare for negotiation. And in terms of BATNA strategy, let me try to share my screen with you here. In terms of BATNA strategy, I hope you can see this screen where your BATNA is your power. Because BATNA is so important in a negotiation, you should think of BATNA in terms of 3 pieces of a negotiation strategy. Number 1, when you go into a negotiation, try to find the other side's BATNA. That will tell you how powerful they are. If they have a good alternative, that means that they're very powerful, and that puts you in a weaker position. Now, when you go into a negotiation, are you going to tell them or disclose your BATNA? Are you going to let them know what your best alternative to a negotiated agreement is? Often when I ask this question in class, most of the class will say immediately, well, no, you want to keep your BATNA secret from the other side. But then eventually through the discussion, we reach the conclusion that it depends whether or not you will disclose your BATNA. If you have a strong BATNA, then there's no harm in letting the other side know, letting them know how powerful you are, and letting them know that if you don't get what you want, then you can walk away because you have a strong alternative. I'm sitting here in the town of Ann Arbor, Michigan, and down the street, there's a city called Detroit, where the major car companies are located. Let's say that you are a supplier to one of the car companies, to Ford Motor Company. And let's say that you negotiate your contract with Ford every 3 years. And so now you are ready to renegotiate your contract at the end of 3 years. When you walk into the office of Ford, my guess is that Ford is going to tell you their BATNA before they say good morning to you. They're going to say, look, we have 5 other suppliers sitting out in the waiting room who would love to have our business, and they're willing to provide the product at a lower price than you. They're going to let you know how powerful they are. So the basic rule of thumb in disclosing BATNA is if you have a strong BATNA, no problem. If you have a weak BATNA, then you've got a challenge. You have to be a little bit more subtle, maybe somehow make them think you have a stronger BATNA than what you do. The second piece of the negotiation of your BATNA strategy is to try to weaken their power. So think about that for a second. You're the supplier to Ford. Let's say you've worked with Ford for the last 15 years. Now you're renegotiating your contract and they say to you, look, if you don't lower your price, I've got several other suppliers who would love to have our business. So how do you react to that? Well, what you could do to weaken their BATNA is to point out that you have worked with them for 15 years. You've always delivered a high quality product. You've delivered your product on time. You're very reliable. You've worked with them as a team, a new product development, and so on. And then point out, well, you might be getting a little cheaper price, but you're taking a huge risk because of all the benefits that arise from working with you. So the second piece of this, try to weaken their BATNA. And then finally, try to improve your own BATNA, improve your own power. I've worked with suppliers over the years, and one of the big mistakes some of them make is putting all of their eggs in one basket. They only work with one car company. They only have one alternative. So if they don't do what Ford requires of them, they have no place to go. They have no alternative places to sell their product. And this actually relates to your business strategy, diversifying, making sure that you have a diverse group of customers. So that is the fourth of our 5 elements of the 5 elements of preparing for negotiation. The last one is also an acronym, and the acronym is called ZOPA, Z-O-P-A. And what that stands for is Zone of Potential Agreement. In other words, when you look at the numbers, when you look at your numbers, your big 5 numbers, and when you look at the other side's numbers, in what zone can the deal take place between what number and what number? Now, of course, it's easy to prepare your own numbers, your own reservation price, your own target, your own stretch goal. That is pretty easy. It's more difficult to guess what the numbers of the other side are. But that's an important part of your preparation for negotiation. Try to guess those numbers. And then, of course, once you start negotiation, you'll revise the numbers to make them more accurate. Once you lay out your numbers and the numbers of the other side, then what are the key numbers in determining your zone of potential agreement? The 2 key numbers are your reservation price and the other side's reservation price. Using our car example, my reservation price will be the lowest number, the lowest amount that I am willing to sell the car. Your reservation price is the highest number that you're willing to pay for the car. So I think this is very logical. Look at the two reservation prices, and that will give you an idea of the zone in which the deal can take place. Now, when you do this analysis, your ZOPA analysis, then in some cases, you'll decide it's not even worth negotiating because there is no zone of potential agreement. So why waste our time? But in other cases, in many cases, you'll find there is a zone and the deal will take place within that zone. So those, we talked about the big five in Africa. These are the big five when you prepare for a negotiation. What's your reservation price? What's your target? What's your stretch goal? Number 4, the most important, what is your BATNA, which gives you power? And then finally, what is your ZOPA, your zone of potential agreement? So that's the first piece of what I would like to cover this morning. I hope that this will give you a checklist for use in your future negotiations. The second piece that I want to focus on is the psychology of negotiation, the psychological tools and traps. And again, these are tools when you use them, but they are traps when used by the other side, traps that you want to be able to recognize so that you don't become trapped. And so let's start with this example. In my classes, I ask my students to think of the last 3 digits of their phone number and add 400 to the last 3 digits. So you can see here the range on the left side. It ranges from 400 to 1399, the numbers that they write down. And then I tell them that Attila the Hun was one of the most feared conquerors in world history. He was eventually defeated. And I asked them to guess. Well, first of all, I asked them, was he defeated before or after the number they wrote down? So for example, let's say one of the students, the last 3 digits of their phone number was 199, they added 400, and that brought it up to 599. So was Attila the Hun defeated before or after the year 599? And then I asked them to guess the year that Attila the Hun was defeated. And these are the results from a typical class. You can see on the left-hand side, the categories, the last 3 digits plus 400, and on the right-hand side, their estimated date of the defeat of Attila the Hun. Now, if you were a scientist stepping back and looking at these numbers, what might you conclude? What this illustrates is something called anchoring. Most students have no idea when Attila the Hun was defeated, so they're guessing. And when you and I are faced with an uncertain question, and someone throws out a random number, the human mind will anchor on that number in answering the question. So you can see here as the last 3 digits plus 400 of their phone number increased, also the date that they estimated the defeat of Attila the Hun also increased. Now, what is the relationship between the date of the defeat of Attila the Hun and their phone number? No relationship at all. Their phone number has nothing to do with Attila the Hun. It's just a random number. But the effect of anchoring is so powerful. You can throw out any number and the human mind will anchor on that number. And this is an effect that not only affects ordinary people like you and me, even experts are trapped by anchoring. One researcher took the symptoms of somebody who might have lung disease, and he showed it to a group of lung disease experts. And he said, do you think the chances of this person having lung disease are higher or lower than 25%? And the expert doctors wrote down either higher or lower. And then he said, what do you think the chances are of this person having lung disease? And they wrote down a number. Then he took the same symptoms to another group of lung disease experts, but he changed the question a little bit. He said, what do you think that experienced business person is going to say? Virtually every business person I've talked with always says, let the other person throw out the first number. That's the conventional business wisdom. What does anchoring tell you? Anchoring tells you that you should throw out the first number to try to anchor them to your number. So who's correct here? The conventional business wisdom or the principle of anchoring? I think both sides are correct. I think that if you're in a negotiation and the value of what is being negotiated is uncertain, then follow the conventional business wisdom, let the other side throw out the first number, because that's a way to gather information about what the item is worth. However, if you're fairly confident that you know what the other item is worth, then you throw out the first number and try to anchor them to your number. Just for example, I was teaching in Luxembourg recently, and one of the people in my class ran an executive search business. He was hired by companies to find managers and executives whom they wanted to hire. And so when he signs up a new company, he has to agree on how much the company is going to pay him. And he told me that he knows that most companies pay around 25% of the first year's salary of the person they hire. And because he was fairly certain of what the value of this service was, he threw out the first number during his negotiation. He tried to anchor the company to something higher than the 25%. So that's psychological tool number one, a very powerful tool called anchoring. Let's try a second psychological tool. And I've picked something here that sadly is very relevant today. I know in Pakistan, it's a huge issue. In the United States, we're getting hammered by the pandemic, by COVID, especially in some areas like California. Huge number of deaths and huge number of people contracting COVID. So here, let's assume that you live in an area where a new strain of COVID is being noticed. And you are a political leader in this area. And you expect that this new strain of COVID is going to kill 600 people in your town. But you have developed two options for dealing with this crisis. You can adopt program A, where you're definitely going to save 200 people. Or you can adopt program B, where there's a 1/3 chance that you'll save 600 people, but a 2/3 chance that no one will be saved. So think about that for a second and think, you're the political leader here. You have to decide on which of these programs you're going to select. The one that's definitely going to save 200, or the one that has a 1/3 chance of saving 600 and a 2/3 chance that everybody will die. So you all have a result in mind. Okay, now let me give you two other options and see what you will decide. Instead of program A and program B, let's say you have program C and program D. With program C, it is definite that 400 people will die. With program D, there's a 1/3 chance nobody will die and a 2/3 chance 600 people will die. So here again, you're the political leader in this town. You have to now select between these two programs, program C and program D. So make your selection here, C or D. Okay, so what the researchers have discovered is that when you are presented with the selection between program A and program B, about 80%, over 80% of people will select program A. I don't know how that matches with your selection, but if you pick program A, then you're in a large majority of people. When you're presented with the second choice, program C versus program D, over 80% will select program D. So here again, if you pick program D, you're in the large majority. So question, what's the difference between program A and program C? No difference. It's just the way that the option is worded. What's the difference between program B and program D? Again, no difference. It's just the way that the choice is worded. And the way that the choice is worded, or we call it framing, the way that a choice is framed plays a huge role in the decision that people make. When you frame the choice as a positive choice, program A versus program B, framed in terms of saving people, then most people, in this example, over 80% will pick the sure thing. They become risk averse, pick the sure thing. So over 80% will pick program A. When you frame the choice as a negative choice, as in this choice between C and D, then people become risk seeking. They will not pick the sure choice. And so again, over 80% select program D. So this is based on the work of a psychologist named Danny Kahneman. His work it's called prospect theory. It's been called one of the most important discoveries over the last few decades in the way people make decisions. And think how powerful this is. Let's say you're a consultant working for a company and you've come up with two options, and you strongly think that the company should pick option one as opposed to option two. Well, the way you present those two options to the company leaders will have a huge impact on the decision they make. Positive choice, they're going to pick the risk averse option. Negative choice, they will be more risk seeking. So whether you're presenting two options to the company as a consultant, or to your boss, or to team members if you're working on a team, this is a very powerful decision tool. Okay, let me try something else here. Let me ask you, see how we're doing on time, okay? Let me ask you this question, and this might be difficult because of course you don't live in the United States, but do you think more people in the United States die in motor vehicle accidents, or do they die from lung cancer? When I ask this question to my students or to business executives, a very large percentage select motor vehicle accidents. I would say it's usually about 90% select motor vehicle accidents. Even I teach occasionally to a group of doctors, and even doctors will say motor vehicle accidents. Here's the actual results. In the United States, in a typical year, around 34,000 people die in motor vehicle accidents, and 160,000 from lung cancer. So again, most people pick motor vehicle accidents, but that's wildly different from the actual results. Now, what's going on here? Why do people, why are people so unable to estimate, to select the right answer? Well, what happens in your brain, and this happens so quickly that you don't even know it. It just takes a fraction of a second. You retrieve information that is easily available. This is called the availability principle. You pick information that's easily available. And the information about motor vehicle accidents is more easily available than information about lung cancer. I don't know what the situation is like in Pakistan, but in the United States, if there's a motor vehicle accident, we see pictures of the accident in the news. We hear reports about serious injury and deaths. Whereas if somebody dies from lung cancer, it's not front page news. It probably isn't even going to be mentioned in the obituary of the person who died. So the human brain grabs the information in just a split second that is easily available, which causes a distortion when people are addressing this question. So here's a negotiation example of availability. A few years ago, I was working with somebody from a company that manufactured fighter planes that they sold to the US government. And the way it works is they negotiate with the government. The government then takes several months to make a decision. And so one of the people from this company asked me this question. He said, during the negotiation, we want to show a video to the government people of our fighter planes. And we have to decide between two videos. One video shows the fighter plane flying in a beautiful sunny day with a blue sky and light classical music in the background. The other video shows the fighter plane flying in a thunderstorm, lightning, dark clouds, hard rock, loud hard rock music in the background. He said, which video do you think we should use? Well, I'm not sure if you would agree with this, but I recommended the second video because I thought that when the government officials made their decision several months later, they're more likely to remember that second video. It's more like the automobile accident. Even though they don't realize it, their brain is going to retrieve that information more quickly than the light classical music video. Okay, let's try something else, something called entrapment. And let me show you something here on the camera. This is, I don't know if you can see it or not, this is a $20 bill, American US $20 bill. It's got sometimes we call these Jacksons because it's got a picture of a former president named Andrew Jackson on it. So in my classes, I take this $20 bill and I auction it off to the class. I tell the class the highest bidder gets the $20. So if you bid $14 and that's the high bid, you get the 20 and you pay me 14. The only catch is the second highest bidder also has to pay me. So we start the bidding at $1, and a lot of people jump in to the bidding. But then as we approach, as the number rises with the bidding and approaches $20, then a lot of people drop out. And it usually turns out 2 people are left as the bidding reaches 20. And those 2 people continue to bid above 20 because they realize that, let's say if they bid 25 and they win, they will pay me 25, they'll get to 20, but they'll only be out $5. Whereas if somebody bid 24 and stopped there, they would pay me 24 and get nothing in return. So when I do this in class, usually the bidding continues until they reach around $50 or $55. And then they stop bidding. Like the winner might bid $55 and the loser might bid $50. And they finally realize this could go on forever and they stop. By the way, this is a great way to make money at parties, if you'd like. Now, let me tell you a story that is going to shock you. So if you have a seatbelt on your chair, please buckle it because you might fall off your chair when you hear this example. A friend of mine at another university also does this exercise. It's called a dollar auction. And he did this exercise recently, and he and everyone in the class was shocked by the results because 2 people, as usual, 2 people ended up bidding against each other. And the bidding reached, just try to guess the highest number you can think that somebody would bid for the $20. Have that in your mind? Okay, the bidding in this case reached $15,000. That was the winning bid. And the losing bid was $14,000. And the professor made it clear, this is not a game. You are going to have to pay me whatever you bid. That's our contract. And so the winner had to write a check for $15,000 and got the $20. The loser had to write a check for $14,000 and didn't get the $20. So the professor was stunned, the class was stunned. And when they finished, he asked the winner, why in the world would you bid $15,000 for $20? She said, well, I realize that the money is going to the university. And she said, I'm a doctor. Every year I make a large gift to the university. And this was my way of making the gift and having some fun with it. Okay. Then he asked the loser, why in the world would you bid $14,000 and you didn't even get the $20? He said, well, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a risk taker. I'm very competitive. And I just got carried away with the negotiation. So this is the challenge that you face with many negotiations. And that is when you enter into a negotiation, this is called entrapment. He had been trapped because he and the other person got into this competitive situation that got out of hand, went way higher. And it cost him $14,000 and her $15,000. So to avoid entrapment, the lesson from this is always look at a negotiation from the perspective of the other side. Look at a negotiation from the perspective of the other side. This is what separates a good negotiator from a great negotiator. This ability to see the deal from the other side. When you start this dollar auction negotiation, you think to yourself, well, gee, this looks like a good deal. I might bid 14 and get 20. But think about everybody else in the classroom. They're all thinking the same thing. And when you think ahead to what happens, then you realize that it's possible to become entrapped. Let me give you a real life example of entrapment, or excuse me, of looking at a deal from the other side. So as you probably heard, and this is very embarrassing for America, we've just been through a brutal presidential election, and the drama continues here. Well, several years ago, there's another presidential election involving a person named Teddy Roosevelt, who was eventually elected president. Teddy Roosevelt, just before the election, decided to take a train tour across America, giving speeches. And he thought this would help him win the election. He also had 3 million pamphlets printed with a picture of him looking very presidential. And he was going to pass out these pamphlets as he took the train tour across America. Just before he left on the tour, he discovered that a photography studio owned the copyright to the picture. And Teddy didn't have any money left in his campaign to pay for copyright permission. And he didn't want to use the picture illegally, but he needed these pamphlets to win the election. So he didn't know what to do. Finally, he called one of his supporters, who was a great negotiator in New York City. And he asked, "What should I do?" Now, if he had called you, what would you advise Teddy? If he had explained to you that, look, we printed 3 million pamphlets with my picture, a photography studio owns the copyright. I can't afford to pay for copyright permission, and I don't want to use the picture illegally, but we need these pamphlets to win the election. What would you advise Teddy Roosevelt? When I ask my students this question, some of them come up with very creative responses. They say, well, maybe offer him the position of White House photographer, or maybe point out that this is going to be good publicity for the photography studio. And those are very good strategies. But this is what the great negotiator did. He sent a telegram to the photography studio, and he said, "We are printing pamphlets with a picture of Teddy Roosevelt. This is going to be great publicity for the photography studio whose photo we use. How much will you pay us to use your photo?" And the photography studio sent a telegram back that said, "We will pay you $250 if you use our photograph." So that's the great negotiator. Instead of Roosevelt paying the studio, he got the studio to pay Roosevelt. He looked at the deal from the other side. Okay, let's try one last. We're running out of time here. Let's try one last psychological tool. And let me give you a personal example. When I bought my first house, a real estate agent took me to a house that was the ugliest house I've ever seen. And it was run down. It needed a lot of repair. And it had a huge price. I said, "I'm not interested." Then she took me to a second house. This house was attractive, but it also was run down, needed a lot of repair, huge price. I said, "Not interested." Then she took me to a third house. This house was attractive, it was well maintained, and it had a huge price. And I said, "I'll take it." Now, what had she done to me? What had this realtor done to me psychologically? This is an example of something called the contrast principle. And the principle runs like this. If you show something to the other side along with other items, it will look much different than when you show the item separately. So if she had taken me to the third house first, I would have said, "Not interested, price is way too high." But when she took me to the other two houses first, I looked at the third house in contrast to the first two, and it looked a lot better. So I accepted the offer. to buy the house. Real estate agents call these setup properties. They're setting you up to buy the third house. But in psychological terms, this is the contrast principle that, again, is useful in negotiation. Let me close out our look at psychological tools with a very sad story involving a university student who is writing to her parents. And this is the way her letter reads. Dear Mom and Dad, it has been 3 months since I left for college. I'm sorry for my thoughtlessness in not having written before. I will bring you up to date now, but before you read on, you had better sit down, okay? I am getting along pretty well now. The skull fracture and the concussion I got when I jumped out of my apartment window when it caught on fire shortly after my arrival is pretty well healed. I only spent 2 weeks in the hospital and now I can see almost normally, and I only get those sick headaches once a day. Fortunately, the fire and my jump were witnessed by Roger, an attendant at the gas station nearby, and he was the one who called the fire department. He also visited me in the hospital, and since I had nowhere to live because of the burnout apartment, he was kind enough to invite me to share his apartment with him. He's a very fine man, and we are planning to get married. We haven't set the date yet, but it will be before my pregnancy begins to show. His divorce is final now, and he shares custody of his 3 children. The reason for the delay in my marriage is that Roger has a minor infection which prevents us from passing our premarital blood tests, and I carelessly caught the infection from him. This will soon clear up when the penicillin injections I take after the penicillin injections I take daily. Now that I brought you up to date, I want to tell you there was no fire. I did not have a concussion or skull fracture. I was not in the hospital. I am not pregnant. I am not engaged. I do not have an infectious disease, and there is no divorced man in my life. However, I am getting a D in my art class and an F in biology, and I want you to see these grades in their proper perspective. Your loving daughter, Jane. Well, Jane might be flunking biology, but I think she's going to get an A+ in psychology because she really understands this contrast principle. Okay, so the last thing that I promised to show you were some tools that you can use in negotiation. So let me go up to share screen again. And so I hope you all can see this Google screen. And so I prepared a website that contains a number of tools that I think will be useful in your future negotiation. So all you have to do is go to Google, type in negotiation planner, and the very first thing that will come up is my website called Negotiation Planner. And at this website, you will find several tools, several checklists that are useful in preparing for your future negotiations. The most important of these is something called the Negotiation Planner. And this helps you think about what are your goals? What are your best alternatives? Remember, BATNA is by far the most important part of your negotiation preparation. And then it helps you think about issues that are likely to arise apart from price, such as your relationship to the other side. And then questions about price. This is what we covered earlier. What's your reservation price? What's your target price? What's your stretch goal? And then it also has a section talking about authority when agents are involved in the negotiation. So I highly recommend that you use this. It's a free tool to help you plan for your future negotiations. I recently received a message from an executive. He was an American executive working in Singapore. And he said that he was negotiating a deal. And just before they concluded the deal, he pulled out this checklist and he went through the checklist. And as a result of that, he saved $4 million in his negotiation. If you look at the right here of the webpage, you'll see other tools that you can use. There's one tool called Negotiation Style. And you can use this to examine your own negotiation style. But this is very useful when you're negotiating with somebody from another culture. Let's say you're negotiating with somebody from America. You can assess your own style, and then you can do an assessment of the American's negotiation style, and then do what's called a gap analysis. Where are the gaps between your style and the style of the other side? And you can use these to become more aware, more educated about where your style is likely to conflict with the style of the other side. There's something I call a power tool, which is basically what we talked about earlier. It focuses on BATNA and your BATNA strategy, finding the other side's BATNA, improving your BATNA, and weakening their BATNA. There's a checklist of psychological tools. We've just talked about that. There's a checklist of negotiation ethics. Some of these ethical principles are required by law, and others are voluntary standards and guidelines when you face an ethical dilemma in negotiation. There's a contract checklist. This is a checklist of the legal principles that you should keep in mind when you're negotiating a deal. And then finally, there's something called life goals. A life goals analysis, when you're involved in a negotiation, a life goals analysis encourages you to think beyond the specific deal and think about larger issues in your life. I first learned about this life goals analysis a few years ago, and I'm going to close with this example. I learned about it a few years ago when the American Bar Association, the National Association of Lawyers in America, invited me to give a talk at their annual meeting. And they paired me up with a person whom I thought was the best mediator in the world. And I was very excited about being paired with him because I wanted to learn what he had to say. And his central message was, when you're involved in a negotiation, think of the big picture, think of your life goals. And he gave this example. He said that a few years ago, there was a Chinese couple in Sydney, Australia, who were getting a divorce. This mediator was from Australia. And the husband was a very prominent doctor in Sydney, very successful, high income, very prestigious job, lots of friends. His wife was very unsuccessful and had few friends. She tried to start a business and failed. So they were getting divorced. They had divided up most of their property. They got it down to the last $50,000, and they were arguing over that amount of money. They couldn't decide how to split the last $50,000. So my friend was brought in as a mediator, and he suggested that they do a life goals analysis. He suggested that each of them sit down separately and think of this dispute in light of the personal goals in life. The wife did that. The husband refused. And so they continued to fight, and finally they basically just divided that $50,000. Came time for their divorce hearing. The husband and his friends walked into the courtroom. They were very loud, very happy. Many friends attended. They sat on one side of the courtroom. The wife walked a couple of her friends. According to this famous mediator, was that if he had taken the time to think about his life goals, what does he want in terms of finances, relationships, retirement, etc., he would have been much kinder to his ex-wife during this divorce negotiation. So, Afaq, I think I'll close there. We've covered, as promised, the big five negotiation standards that are important in developing your negotiation strategy. We've covered the key psychological tools, and we've covered this toolkit. Let me, however, just mention two final points. When you go to this website, you have a list of the tools on the right-hand side. And then there's a link at the top called Free Negotiation Course. And this is a free, massive online course. It's called a MOOC. And if you click one of the links, the first link here, you can go to the course. You can see here, let's see, it says that as of today, 963,000 people around the world have enrolled in the course. And it covers the concepts that we talked about, but also a number of other concepts that I mentioned when going through the tools. You can read the reviews. There are over 3,000 reviews. You can see the ratings. So I hope that this course will be useful to you. There are around 8.5 hours of videos, which you can stretch out over several weeks, or you can binge watch them in one weekend. One of the features that people like best about the course is that at the end of the course, you have an opportunity to select somebody else taking the course from around the world. So for example, you can pick somebody from Brazil, somebody from San Francisco, somebody from Africa, Russia, and go through an actual negotiation with them online, and then get feedback about what you do well as a negotiator and how you can improve. So there's this course, and then the other thing I wanted to mention, there's a guidebook called Negotiating for Success. This is available on Coursera. It's available on Amazon. Oh, I see today, this changes every day, but right now it's the #1 bestseller, which I'm happy about. But you can see I've priced it very low. The Kindle version is $7.99. The paperback is $14.99. I priced it low so you can use the book. I'm not promoting this for financial gain. I donate my royalties from the book to the university. But the book has a summary of the key points from the course, so that after the course, if you need a reference, let's say you're involved in a negotiation and you don't want to go through all the videos to find the point you're looking for, then you've got this reference book that I hope will be useful. So, Afaq, I think that I apologize. I've gone over by 10 minutes.
It's okay. It's okay, Professor. It was so nice that we can all sit for 1 hour. It was amazing. So thank you so much. And I also strongly recommend your course on Coursera, because I am also been a student of that course. As you can see, around 1 million students have joined that course, and it was a wonderful experience learning from you, Professor. And I also strongly recommend the book. And it was a wonderful session, Professor. All I can say, And we have few questions regarding the webinar. So I would like to ask these questions on behalf of students one by one. So can we proceed,
Sure.
Professor?
Yes, please. Yes.
Thank you. So one of the students asked that in a certain situation at a workplace, what would be the best approach to negotiation?
Okay, now that's a very general question, and there are a lot of negotiations that take place in a workplace. One of the most difficult negotiations is when you're negotiating with somebody else at work over resources. Those are probably more difficult negotiations than negotiating with people from the outside. But you also, in a workplace, you've got conflicts between people, personality conflicts. You have your own personal negotiations when you're negotiating for a raise or for a higher position in the company. So there's a large number of negotiations that take place in the workplace. I think my bottom line quick advice is to use the same strategies for negotiating at work that you would use in negotiating with, let's say, a supplier. When you're negotiating with somebody else over resources, let's say, for example, that somebody in finance in your company has put budget restrictions on your department, and you're negotiating for more money for your department. It's very important to think about your underlying interests in the negotiation, find out where your interests match the other side, and use that in negotiating a solution. And remember, BATNA is always huge. If it's let's say it's a personal negotiation where you're negotiating for a raise or a higher position, often the company is in a much more powerful position because of its BATNA. If the company refuses to give you a raise, what are your options and what are the company's options? Often the company can easily hire somebody else to replace you, but do you have other options? Do you have the ability to walk away to another company? That's the challenge with a negotiation for a higher salary. Often your alternatives aren't as good as the company's alternatives, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So the BATNA is one of the important tools.
Yes. Yeah. Even within a company, your BATNA is very important.
And in certain situations, as for the question, the certain situations like you have to negotiate suddenly, you are not prepared for it. So the BATNA you should be considering. Yes, Professor.
I think you broke up.
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me, Professor?
Faces. Well, no, those are no, they're not live. Oh, there. Afaq, could you unmute? Afaq, you're.
I'm sorry, Professor. I had a bad internet. I'm really sorry.
Oh, no problem. Okay.
Okay. And so we have another question from the student, and she's asking about why we use the term fixed pi.
We use the term fixed pi because the traditional approach to negotiation was you're arguing over a pie that has one size. And so what that means is that the larger the piece of pie that I get means that you get a smaller piece of pie. It's called win-lose negotiation. The more I win, the greater you lose. And so the modern negotiation strategy is, instead of arguing over a fixed pie, try to build a larger pie that benefits both sides. And when you build a larger pie, then both of us can end up in a better position than when we're arguing over a fixed pie. And the challenge to do this is to ask about the interests of the other side and try to find out where the other side's interests match your own interests. The key to this is, instead of asking the other side, what do you want? Ask them, why do you want it? What are your underlying interests? And when you do that, you might find that there are matching interests that enable you to both come out better than the traditional fixed pie approach.
Wonderful. That explains it very beautifully here. Thank you so much. And then we have another question from a student, that does the culture have an effect on negotiation strategy? If yes, then how can we develop a strategy for a negotiation involving multicultural participants? So the person we are dealing with are from different cultures. So I think that's a very broad question, but maybe you can explain it shortly.
That's a great question. And yes, I think the bottom line is yes, culture does play an important difference. And think in terms of two types of culture. One type of culture is your negotiation style. The style of negotiation can be different. The other difference is the underlying values and beliefs that are different between two cultures. Researchers call negotiation style your surface culture, whereas your underlying values and beliefs are called the deep culture. And both of them play a big difference. And so remember, I showed you a tool you can use to assess your negotiation style. When you're in a cross-cultural negotiation, I recommend that you use that to spot the key differences between your style and the style of the other side. I think that's a very useful tool, not only in assessing your own style, but in finding out about the other side. But remember, differences in culture don't only apply to differences between countries. They also apply within a country. They also apply to issues like age. I think that, for example, when I look at the age of people taking my courses, sometimes I'll work with senior executives, older people who might be in their 50s, and their style might be a lot different from someone who is in their 20s, even though everybody is from the same culture. Also, there are differences in style depending on where you live in your own country. For example, I teach every year in Northern Italy. And when I ask the people in my class, is your style the same as people from Southern Italy? They become very upset and agitated. They say, no. The people from Southern Italy are more relaxed. They're more lazy than we are. They have different attitudes toward negotiation. So I'm not sure if this is true in Pakistan or not, but I'm guessing that depending on where you live in Pakistan might play a role in your negotiation style, even though you're all from the same country.
Yes.
Does that make sense, Afaq?
Yeah, it does make sense. Thank you, Professor. And then we have another question, that during negotiations, goals can be changed due to some hidden facts that were disclosed during a negotiation?
Oh, absolutely. And great question. And I think that the great negotiators are the ones who are flexible. They're able to obtain this new information during a negotiation and immediately recalibrate, immediately revise their negotiation strategy in light of the new information. Yeah, those are the great negotiators who are able to do that.
And Professor, we have a last question from a student. Bad faith is considered in types of negotiations. How we identify false negotiators?
Would you please repeat that, the first part, Afaq?
Bad faith is considered in types of negotiations. So how we identify false negotiators?
Okay, great question. And what the researchers have discovered is that people don't like to tell outright lies in negotiation. But what they do instead is that they fail to disclose information. They keep certain information secret in bad faith. So what you can do is to ask a lot of questions, keep hammering them with questions, because they are going to be very reluctant to tell outright lies to you in answering your questions. And so that's the way to get at the truth of the matter. Ask as many questions as possible. Just let me close on that note. Some people think of negotiation as persuasion, trying to persuade the other side to do what you want. The great negotiators are the ones who have the ability to ask questions, questions that identify the interests of the other side, questions that uncover bad faith. The really good negotiators not only ask questions, but they listen carefully to the answers. And I'll just close with this note. There's been some recent research on the human brain. People have done brain scans, fMRIs. And I have some bad news. As I look at your pictures, I have some bad news for probably a majority of you. What the research has discovered is that males only have the ability to listen using half their brain. Males have much more difficulty listening than females. Now, females didn't need this research to realize that this is the case. I think females knew this all along, that males have more difficulty listening. So my final word to you is, if you're a male, Omar, I like your icon. If you're a male, you have to work much harder to be a good listener, which will make you a better negotiator.
Thank you so much, Professor. And it was amazing. So that's the end of the question answer session. And it was really an honor for each of us to have you, Professor. And I got the message from the dean. He just have an emergency. That's why he couldn't attend the webinar. He personally wanted to thank you, but due to some situation, he was not able to. And he said he sent his best wishes and congratulations and a bundle of thanks to you. So we are really grateful, Professor. And finally, on behalf of our institute and students, I would like to thank you again, Professor. And our institutions look forward to such future collaborations and to have you here. So I'm really thankful to you and for the students for joining us, and especially our faculty members of our institutes. They are with us, like the Umar, Sir Umar. And I wish everyone a wonderful time and good health. So thank you so much again, and thank you so much, Professor. And I wish you and your family good health.
Thank you, and good luck with your future negotiations, everyone.
Okay, sir, Professor. Good luck. Thanks.
Have a good evening.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, and for you, good morning. I hope by now your wife had already taken 2 or 3 cups of coffee.
She has, so she's much more cheerful. See,
that's really good.
I hope she left some for me, or else we're going to have to negotiate over the coffee.
Very good. Okay,
have a good evening.
Thank you, Professor. Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye, Professor.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.